every day, and through my lunch hour, I started to think, I don't really want this. This is not what I've signed up for. But of course I did, but I didn't know that that's what I signed up for. Life's full of all those ifs and buts and maybes. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's made me a better person. Maybe I've become a better singer or artist, which is what I wanted to be anyway. I didn't want to be a muppet or a puppet or a thing. And I think it's scarred me big time because I never actually earned from the work I did, which is a real pain, you know, especially as you get older and you think, oh, hang on, how am I going to pay the oil this winter for the heating? Or, and then, you know, I could go, start thinking bad things, but I try not to because it's the gift that I got was the fame that came with it and what I did with it.
Looking back 36 years, 1980, film directed by Brian Gibson, written by him, and then starring Hazel O'Connor. Very significant to me because she was from Coventry and she represented a period of time that we were very much a part of, which was the post-punk new wave era that we relished in. And there she was, on screen, representing it. I'm looking back at it now, like I say, 36 years later, she's still, it's an unbelievable screen performance. She represents the industry rather well. She had first-hand experience of it, obviously, because she was part of that scene at the time. The soundtrack is quite outstanding and still resonates today when you listen to one or two of them. Particularly Will You, which still features in films. They're not only just did it appear in Breaking Glass, but it's also used in other little vignette pieces in other movies later on in years.
We did what we did best live. The two-tone concerts were amazing, joyous experiences. It was fantastic. This was us doing what we did best. So documenting that would be the best way to showcase the group. It was an EP because well, you know, there were only 2 songs on a single. We could actually put 5 songs on this, you know, on this thing, and it had never been done before.
Too Much Too Young meant a lot to me at the time because it was the first two-time #1, the first specials #1, and it just seemed to capture the energy and represented what they were doing in their live shows more than any of the previous records had. And it also means a lot to me personally because it's one of my favourite songs to play in the band I play in Special Group. It always goes down a storm with audiences all over the country.
I was in America, where the Specials were on tour in America at the time, which was probably just as well. And it was kind of, woo, this was really good. You know, everybody was down to breakfast with a beam on their face, you know, great, it's #1. Yeah, I mean, it was what I wanted to be, you know. When I was, you know, when I watched The Searchers on Thank Your Lucky Stars when I was 11 or something, you know, it's like, wow, I'd like to do that, and I never, in a million years thought that I would. But there I was, you know, and so I phoned my parents, and they were like absolutely overjoyed, and you know, spoke to some people back in Coventry, and it's like, hey, it was terrific, yeah. But then we still had to drive to the airport and get on the plane and fly to Denver to do our next day's gig. So it was like, it was great, but life carried on, you know.
Coventry had a really good music scene in the late 70s, early 80s, and alternative sounds was such an important part of that. But so was the album that came off from it, the Sent from Coventry album, featuring the local bands that I used to go and watch week in, week out.
I'd seen a lot of other cities, they'd got a boom, synth punk, post-punk. A lot of other cities had got a boom in local music, and they'd been put, I remember a Bristol compilation album came out, was it Leeds? I got a few of them. There was quite a lot going on. So outside of London really, because London already had the music industry, so, and this was the time of the more provincial towns and there was a lot going on. but it was bands the same as we had in Coventry that would put out a single that a few people got hold of, probably collector's items now, you know, but it was nice that they were being collected on an album, and Coventry hadn't got that, and I thought, well, I'm in a position, I do the fanzine, I've got the contacts, I know the bands, and also I had some contacts with labels, because I got promotional copies. One of the labels I got promotional copies from was Cherry Red Records, and so obviously I was in contact with them, and they'd just done, I think they did the Bristol bands compilation, and I thought, well, maybe they want to do a Coventry one, so I just wrote to them, or spoke to them, and yeah, they were well up for it. Helped by the fact that the specials had got quite well known by then, so there was something to be said for that, actually. Did us a bit of a favour. And they went for it, and they got the bands down to Woodbine Street Studios in Leamington. I mean, I got in touch with a lot of the bands, and so there was a certain influence of what I like, yeah, I guess. So got Squad on there, Wild Boys, Homicide.
What Homicide had was the Gang of Four's manager's brother as our, I think his name was Jed, was our manager. I think he was contacted by Martin to see if we would want to do a song on the album. And the thing was, at that time we'd split up, or we're just about in the process of splitting up. And myself, Ian and Steve turned up at the Woodbine Studios in I think it was Leamington, and we proceeded to set up our equipment. Unfortunately, the drummer Pete didn't turn up for about 2 hours, and we didn't know if he was going to turn up. And then right at the last minute, his dad banged on the door and he came in. We set his drums up, and then we did one take. The producer thought the track was one verse too long, and so after playing it through live with a few guitar overdubs on it, we sliced and chopped it to make it one verse shorter, and I ended up just playing a single sweeping riff and just a strummed a chord more like, and that was used as the finish.
And then got Horace from the Specials to write the sleeve notes on the back.
I would always go out and see local bands. You know, I was always interested in the local music scene, not because I didn't want to, you know, preen around and be a pop star. I like going to see music. So I would I'd usually end up, you know, at the Hope and Anchor watching the the Vietnamese Babies, or I'd be, you know, watching the Targets. So I knew a bit about the scene, and so I was asked to do the cover. So I listened. You know, they gave me a cassette of the album, and so I wrote all that stuff. You know, it was kind of, I wanted to put that Horace, a real pop star. It was ironic. It was like kind of, you know, this was a joke. Remember jokes? But a few people got a bit snotty about it. But hey, that's their problem. I don't mind. You know. I
didn't even put my name on it. I remember I did a copy of Alternative Sounds, a special one to go with it, basically with an interview, a piece on each band that was in it. So it was like a special edition. And there were supposed to be pictures on the front cover, but they decided to just go for a one-colour print, so it's empty apart from a bit of text. If anyone wonders why. And then all I thought was, thanks to Alternative Sounds, would be nice on the back. It came out in May or something, 1980, something like that. And I know they did at least 4,000 copies they sold, which was really good, you know, and got slagged off in some of the major press, which these things always did, and a lot of people loved it. So I'm quite pleased with that one. It was a great snapshot, you know, the amount of, you know, bands that there were all of a sudden, you know, was remarkable. But that's what punk rock did. It kind of liberated them, you know. Obviously the Specials were on. It would have been nice if they were, actually, but they got a big deal by then. What I was sort of, I still to this day wish they had been on, was God's Toys.
God's Toys formed originally, me and our bass player Chris Dickey. He came up to me and said, well, do you want to be in a band, you know, because we were at school together. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, and we met one another one day, and we were both punks, so we sort of became friends again. And he said, like, he just bought this speaker off Horace in the Specials, and he was learning to play bass, and he said, do you want to be the singer in the band? And then we got involved with a guy called Tony Lyons, who was in the Colourfield, and he played like guitar and organ. And Larry, the guitarist in God's Toys, we got him to play guitar, you know. And then of course I met Nick in a wine bar, the keyboards player, and who was doing synthesizer stuff. And we asked him to join, and we all just, you know, became God's Toys. Toby left because he was doing his fine arts degree, and so we started out without Toby, and you know, God's Toys was born. But the music, we tried to make it as original and new as possible, you know, within like a pop sort of idiom, you know. You know, sort of, we didn't consciously try and sound like anybody.
I think God's Toys were one of those bands which inspired a sort of fanatical, but in a good way, response from so many people that I knew, which is very, very difficult to explain. If you saw them live, you'd probably understand what I was talking about, because live they were one of the most incredible bands. They were operating in an era when there was a sort of reaction to the two-tone in a good way of where do we go from here? Well, let's take the idea of wearing just two colours and expand it into a much broader palette. And a lot of that stuff, the sort of new romantic movement, got a lot of justifiable stick for favouring style over substance. On the other hand, God's Toys, I think, got it damn right. I think they actually hit the nail on the head. They were a very attractively glamorous band in many ways, but they didn't let that detract from the music. In fact, it enhanced it.
It was Lisa, our manager, one of our managers, was Stephen Lisa, and she was like an exotic dancer, but she made clothes, you know, and she made the jacket, you know, she just made it, you know, which was amazing. I couldn't make a jacket like that. But I did wear it a few times, but mainly I had this like two-tone silk kind of thing that I would wear. Purple was my colour, because we all had like a colour. Like Nick had yellow, I had purple, Chris had like green, John had pink, and Larry had blue, you know, and so we sort of like the rainbow colours, you know, because we've got, again, a sort of antithesis of two-tone, which was black and white, you know. So it didn't, you know, we didn't manufacture the image, it just happened like that, you know. Like we had a residency at the Climax, we played the Lanchester, we played Warwick University, we played the General Wolf. That's where we used to rehearse. We used to rehearse at the General Wolf. Ken would let us rehearse there, and we'd do a gig for him, you know, on occasion. We recorded All the Born Losers and the B-side, which was packaged to us to heaven in a couple of days, but I wasn't happy with the studio version that we did. And I remember going out, they were all arguing, everyone was arguing, and I went out into the van and started listening to Pink Floyd. I'd had enough by then, but anyway, it was released, and it got to about 114 in the charts, I think. I mean, we were on tour with Adam and the Ants at the time, and they were like the #1 group, you know, they were flying off down to the top of the pops to do the to do the telly. So, but we should have got higher. But I was never happy with it. I didn't like my vocals, and I just didn't like the production. It was too heavy, you know. It was a heavy production, and but the same one we did in Leamington at Johnny Rivers' studio, Woodbine Studios. We used like a brass section because that was like all the rage at the time, and we used a Spanish guitar like Steve Harley, but it didn't, you know, again it didn't do as well as the first, and you know, it was like a bit of a kind of downward thing really. We never charted with either, not proper charted, you know. That was the thing with God's Toys. I thought the songs were good, but we never realised it in the studio, and you have to really. You know, you have to have something very special to have a hit, you know, in those days and in these days, you know. And I don't think we ever really, we were too naive. We did, you know, we were a young band, and we just didn't really cut it. I didn't think in the studio. We were good live, I thought. I thought we were, you know, energetic and good fun live. But as far as the studio is concerned, I didn't think we really cut it. You know, the tour was great fun. It was hard work, very hard work. It was November time. We were basically living in the van. We had a van and like a trailer behind it with the gear in, and we were sleeping in the van most nights, which was like no washing facilities, no proper bedding, no warmth, you know. This was like November time, so it took its toll, you know. I mean, the ants were like, they would come in. We very rarely talked to them. They would come in from the hotel, do the gig and go away again straight away. I mean, originally, like, there was punk audience, you know, to start with, like when we did Liverpool and that. But by, like, when it was #1, it was all screaming girls, and there was, like, stage riots in Edinburgh and, you know, sort of girls being crushed and all sorts of things. So it was quite our own, you know. It had become, you know, he was, as I say, he was at #1. And all the kind of trimmings of that, you know, were happening for him, you know, and we were like trying to do our best to keep up, you know. But, we did all right. I mean, you know, yeah. Apparently they switched the power off halfway through on one of the last encores. I don't know why, whether it was a power cut or whether it was pulled. The plug was pulled. But because I actually spoke to Adam that night, he came up and sat. We were sitting in the balcony. You know, it was all cordoned off and that. And he came up and started. We were just chatting for half an hour, you know. And then we did the gig, and of course, as I say, the plug was pulled, or there was a power cut, or something happened, and of course we couldn't finish the gig, you know. But I think they mended it all. But I think they were overlapping, you know. You know, they were overrunning, you know, as far as, you know, time was concerned, and somebody pulled the plugs, so I think that's what happened, something like that. But Nick was furious about it, and saying, and people were coming up to me saying, oh, you were going down too well, you know, they pulled the plug on you because you did so well. But I don't know if that's the case. Something else was really good. We spent a day at, was it Pebble Mill, or I think the ATV studios, wasn't it? It was ATV. And we got to use the dressing room, the wardrobe room. You know, we could pick anything we wanted from it. I had like a French blue and white top that I nicked from it, that, you know, that I had from it. And we, you know, they sort of did our hair and did our makeup and everything. I remember sort of going into the canteen, and there were like famous people in there that you saw. Yeah, it was great fun doing it. You know, it was. You know, I thought, great, we're getting somewhere at last, you know. It was nice of Martin Bose to get us on, you know. It was really good, yeah. It wasn't really musical differences. We just had enough, really, after the tour, you know. We were exhausted, and Nick didn't really want to do it. I just wanted to carry on. I was happy, but we were very antagonistic towards one another.
Sadly, they didn't have the hits we all assumed it, and again, that's one of the things which I think, unless you were around at the time, you wouldn't realise how many people virtually automatically assumed that God's Toys were going to be a big band. They had really, really great songs. Again, they played with absolute commitment and passion for the material they were doing, and they clearly had charisma, which, you know, put that together with really good songs, and you've got all the right package.
I mean, Ali Nightingale, you know, the DJ, said that we were a band to make it the following year in the Mirror, you know. We should have kept going, you know, but we didn't, so big mistake.
There was a band called Ends who played kind of avant-garde, Henry Cow type music, and I was a big fan of that band. And I used to go and see them regularly at the varying places they played, and got friends with them, and I was playing in a similar band that was trying to do that kind of thing, and when their guitar player decided he was going to leave, they asked me if I'd replace him, and this was in sort of late 1978, early 79 time, and
and I did, learnt a few of their songs and then got writing some of the stuff with them, and we recorded The Lull and The Rounds and Fetch Mr Clifford with Martin Bates singing, and that got on John Peel's show, and so that was good, that felt good, and it got highly acclaimed in the press. People say this is good, this is original, sounds a bit like Beefheart and all that, Robert Wyatt, and we were kind of really proud of that. And basically shortly after that was the end of 1979, and we kind of broke up.
There was an offshoot of the band, the original band, which was very avant-garde, sort of jazz, and they wanted a direction change, Paul and Steve Edson. That's Paul Sampson and Steve Edson. And they wanted to recreate a type of commercial offshoot from Two-Tone, which was like slightly reggae but with a jazz feel.
When we looked at Stereotypes, the six of us party company, I stayed with Steve Edson and wrote a couple of songs that we wanted to try out in a slightly more popular direction, and they happened to be She's Changed Not You and Ben Shertman, and we went into Horizon Studios and recorded it in a day. Within about 10 days of us doing that, there's a Radio 1 interview of, I don't know, some kind of, I can't remember the title of the thing now, some rock programme that was on at, I don't know, 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and they were doing a thing on two-tone ska, and Roger Lomas was doing some interviews on it, and then at the end they said, and we were at Horizon Studios and we heard this and we got our record played sort of 10 days later on Radio 1, so that was kind of, seemed like quite an achievement. And so, and then from there, we had agencies phone us and say, we want you to play, and you know, we can get you gigs and all this sort of thing. And so we thought, well, we haven't got a band, because it was myself and Steve, and we advertised in the Coventry Evening Telegraph for a band and for musicians, and basically, Colin and Tony were two of the very few people that applied.
Became Reluctant Stereotypes with Paul King, myself, Colin Haynes, Steve Edson and Paul Sampson.
Anyway, we got Paul in. We didn't know he could sing until we went to the first demo session.
I mean, from my point of view, you know, I just went into the room and did what I did, and I enjoyed the whole process. You know, headphones on. I was like, oh yeah, I've seen people do this. This is like the professionals, and they were probably smiling on the other side of the glass. So presumably it was sounding all right. And I do remember everyone saying, yeah, that's great. This actually, you know, you sound like a singer. You sound like a person who should be on a record, which I thought was complimentary.
From there on, we had those demos taken to Warner Brothers by Barry Thomas, our manager, who also owned Horizon Studios and everything.
We got a record deal with Warner Brothers at the time.
We recorded the album in sort of March time of 1980.